And now we can get started with the real stuff. Does anybody have any questions about how this is all supposed to work, or any questions about assignments or grading or anything else? If you do come up with something, feel free to chime in. So right now I'm going to get our productivity programs folder here, and the Excel folder, and the Excel practice exercise. And we're pretty far along here. Looking good. We have one of the things, okay. It looks like we got finished with all of the requirements for the exercise. We've got our average, minimum, and maximum down here. We've got all of our totals. We've actually even expanded the titles to cover the, well, I haven't done the whole thing yet. Okay. So this, at this point, that exercise is suitable to turn in as an assignment. So if you have done everything in this first section, that's all you need to do for the exercise. However, these things below the line here, to change font sizes, etc., and so on, those things are all going to be on the test. So hopefully we will be able to get through those and explain how they work and show you how to do them, and then you can have a good time on the test, which at this point is going to turn into like a take-home test. If you want to do these things that we're about to take up, to add them to your assignment paper, that's perfectly okay. You can put anything else in these spreadsheet assignments that you want to, and it will be okay, as long as you have everything that's covered in the requirements. Then you will get full credit for it. And if you want to use it for practicing something else, you're perfectly welcome to do it. You won't get any extra credit, or there won't be anything counted off either. As long as what's required is there, you get full marks. Okay, so let's look at changing font sizes. Not too tough, but there's lots of ways to do it. The main thing is in the font group up here on the ribbon, there is a font size box. It shows you what the currently selected font size is. And if you want a different size, all you have to do is type in the number. Sometimes that works, sometimes it might not, depending on the font that you're using. It might not handle all sizes, in which case when you type something in, it'll probably go to the nearest one that's close to it. Which will be in this list. If you drop this down, you will see all of the normal font sizes. And notice as I point to them, the font size changes. It doesn't actually make the change, It just shows you what it's going to look like. So you can kind of scroll through here without just pointing at different things, and it will show you what that looks like. And then you can just click on one when you see one that you like. This is called Live Preview, and there are lots of buttons that do that. It will show you what it looks like before that actually does anything. Okay, that's two ways to change the font size. These buttons will give you another way. The buttons will actually change the font. Like right now it's 18, so if we hit this increase font size, it will go to 20. So it's another way you can, play with it, see what size you want to use. Notice it went right to 24, and then from there it goes to 26. From there probably there's 28, and then it goes to 36. That's because these buttons are tied to this list. So they will move up and down the list, one item at a time. So this one moves up, this one goes down. So if you're not, for some reason, able to do the live preview on the list itself, you can approach it stepwise with these two buttons. There is yet another way to do this. Over farther in the Styles group, you will see a button called Cell Styles. And if you click that button, you get a gallery, and it has a whole bunch of different cell formats. Now, these are called styles because a style is a collection of formats. So if it has a particular font size, particular font type, a color, a border, any other kind of color of text or background, all of these things are individual format items. It is possible to combine whatever you want of these different style items, different format items, into what is called a style. So you've got a thing down here called New Cell Style that will allow you to create your own style. And it will show up as a button then that you can use just like you would use any of these predefined styles. And that's handy if you have some things that you want formatted in a particular way that may be a little more trouble than just, changing a color or changing a font size. You can combine all these things and make them easy to apply, and that way they're always the same. So it's a good thing. What I want to do is I want to use this title format on my report title, so I'll do that. And notice it has changed the font size and the font type, the face, and the color. So that meets the requirement for changing the font size. So if you use a cell style like that has a different size than the default, that will count. That will get the points. Okay, for our next line there, I'm going to go back to the cell styles and use heading 3. And that gives me an underline and a bolding and increased, I don't know, still hasn't changed the font size, but it did change the color and the bold and underlining, so this has a border. Okay. And that pretty well takes care of that. Now we want to construct a formula for a subtraction. The biggest problem here is just which number do you put in first. What we want to do in our case is I want to find the increase or decrease of this week's total from last week's total. So I'm going to be optimistic and call it increase. If we were in the throes of this coronavirus epidemic, then it would probably more likely be decrease. But we'll stick with increase for a while anyway. What we need is a subtraction formula to take the difference between these two numbers, last week's total, this week's total. So we have an equal sign, and then we put in this week's total and a minus sign, and then last week's total. Okay. That will subtract last week from this week, and presuming that last week is smaller, that is to say this week has more sales than last week, which is too fervently to be hoped, then that will give us the difference and give us the amount of the increase. Okay, so that's what we get for that. And we can autofill that and just run it down the entire list, and that will give us totals for everything. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Now we need to construct a formula to calculate a percentage from a part and a total. It's a very common use of percentages, is to see what percentage is some number from some total amount. So we can use, we need another column here for this. We'll call it percent. And we want to get the total for each category and see what percentage that is of the total overall, which is this guy down here. So once again, we need our equal sign. And we want to get the number that we're trying to find the percentage at, what percentage it is. Put that in there first. Put a slash for the division. And then we want it as a percentage of the total of all the categories. So we'll put that one in there. And that's all there is to it. You know, it's just, you know, two numbers in an operation. That's all that's required. The main difficulty here is just what numbers do you use in which direction. Now, many people have trouble with mathematics. I myself am technically not a teacher. Maybe I've been fooling a lot of people for a while here. I have never taken, in my 20 years of school, I have never taken a single education course. Since the main thing is, do you know the subject matter, then I can qualify for that, you know, but teaching techniques are things I have to pick up on my own. Fortunately, my brother, my sister-in-law, and my ex-wife were all teachers, so I did absorb something. And one of the things I discovered was that mathematics is kind of dicey, because if you don't get the math concepts sometime between the 3rd and 5th grade approximately, then you probably will never get it, because it's a brain development thing. So during that period, 3rd to 5th grade, if you did not catch on to the mathematical concepts, if your brain did not absorb those at that time, then you may have just missed the boat. It will never get there. So I accept the fact that many people do not get math. We try to keep the math in this course to a minimum. So I'm trying to show you how to do it exactly, because you can do math if you know the procedures. If you if you can label things correctly and get things in the right order, based on a set of rules and procedures, you can do it. It's just that you don't have this somewhat intuitive grasp of what's going on. So we try to keep things simple, and I don't have any problem with people who have difficulty with math. I will help you as much as I can, because it's really not something you can help. But that's all there is to doing a percentage. You have the small number that you want to find what percentage it is, and you have the total, which is larger usually, to find what it is a percentage of. Then we can autofill this, presumably. Should be able to. Come on. Oh, I got to finish the... So that gives us now the percentage comes out like a decimal fraction. That's normal. Percent means per 100. So this is 21.6 per 100. But if you divide that by 100, then you get 0.2166, etc., which is the actual fraction that we're dealing with. So the percentages in Excel is a format. So we can go up here, and there it is right there is a percent format. So all we have to do is click the button, and that changes things into a number, which is our fraction multiplied by 100, and then the percent sign that means divided by 100. Okay. If we need a little more accuracy, we can come up here and increase the decimal. As much as we want. We can decrease the decimal. And we should be able to autofill this. It won't work, but that's for reasons I will explain. We come up with a bunch of division by zero errors. Okay, let's take a look and see what's happening. This says J4 divided by J14. That's J4. Sorry, J4, J14. If you look at the picture of this formula, so if we click in the text or the formula bar up here, or double click in the cell, now we see here is the J4 in blue and the J14 in red. What is in the next one that has the error? Well, it's J5 and J15. Well, there's your division by zero right there. that blank space equates to a 0 as far as the division operation is concerned. So that it's trying to divide that by 0. Okay. What about the next one? It got a legitimate number, no error in this one. What's happening? Well, it ran into the minimum number down here and divided by that instead of the total. So what's going on here? Well, it's something called a relative reference. And all cell references, when you first enter them, are in this relative reference form. And what that means is that those numbers, that letter and number that identifies the cell location, is kind of not real. What in like J6, okay? What that really means is that we're talking about we're in L6, okay? So J6 is the cell that's in the same row and it's 2 spaces to the left. That's J6. So what happens when we copy this formula and we paste it somewhere else, which is what happens when you're doing an autofill, it takes the relative position and it applies it to that formula. So all of these are going to change and go down one step at a time. Everything is going to stay in the same relative position to our formula cell. So instead of J8, for instance, it could say, what cell am I in is L8, and so it's L8 minus 2 this way and down 10 this way. So it's all relative positions to the current cell, whatever that cell is. And when we get down one more step, we are down below these bogus numbers that shouldn't be used. And we're back into the blank territory, and so the rest of these are all division by 0. Okay, how do we fix this? There has to be a way, right? This is the next item on our list here, to construct an absolute reference. Okay, now we've been talking about relative references, which is what all these things are. And by the way, anytime you copy a cell that has a formula in it and paste it somewhere else, the relative references are going to change. It's going to give you the cells that are in the same relative location as the original, but they will be different cell numbers. If you have an absolute reference, then you can copy it and it won't change. It's that simple. That's all there is. Okay, so how do we get an absolute reference? Okay, let's start with our first item here, and a couple of ways to do this. If we've already got one, what we want to do is we don't really care about the J or the 4. The J4 needs to change. When we autofill this down, we want that one to change. So it's picking up the cell that's immediately to the 2 cells to the left. That's the one we want. What we don't want is the row number for the total to change. We want that to stay the same all the way down. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, we can put our cursor right in the middle there and type in a $sign. Okay, there's a... Now that $sign has nothing to do with money. It is simply a symbol. It could have been any symbol that isn't otherwise used and meaningful, but they happen to pick out the $sign, so that's what we use. And all that means is don't change this 14. You could put another one in front of the J if you didn't want the J to change. If you're moving something, filling something out horizontally, you wouldn't want to change the column designation. You want it to stay the same column, so you'd put a $sign in front of the column as well. In our case, it doesn't really matter because we're staying in the same column anyway. But that's what you do, is you put the $sign in front of whatever part of this formula you do not want to change. And most of the time this doesn't enter into things because you don't really do that much moving around. But calculating a percentage, one of the places that this frequently happens. Okay, so now we can hit our little enter button here, check mark, and now we can autofill this. And bingo, there we are. We don't really need that 100%. That's obvious, so we'll leave that one out. Okay, and that's how you do an absolute reference. Now, there is a shortcut for that. If while we were entering this, let's just delete this whole business. Okay. While we're putting this in, we put in our equal sign, just same as we were doing before. And we want our total that we're taking the percentage of. We're getting the percentage by. And we take our slash. And we click on our total. Okay, this is the one we don't want to change. There is a shortcut. It's the F4 key. So you don't, no controls or shifts or alts or anything else, just F4. I can find it. And that puts $signs in front of both the row and the column. That, in this case, that's fine. The column doesn't change anyway, so it really doesn't bother anything. But if you are in a situation where you really don't want that to happen, then you can just hit F4 again. And now it'll just keep the row the same and possibly change the column. If you hit it again, then it will switch the $sign to be in front of the column. And so that will be absolute and the row will be changeable. That's not what we want to happen. Okay. If you hit F4 again, it puts it back to completely relative, no $signs at all. So the F4 key will cycle through all the possibilities of what you want. What we really want is we want that row number to be the same. So we put the $sign in front of it. And then when we, first we gotta complete that. Okay. And then we fill down just like before. Okay, so that's how you construct an absolute reference. And that's why you construct an absolute reference. Sometimes you'll have items on the page, either a number, sometimes you have things like a a schedule of amounts for different quantities in an invoice, for instance. That only needs to be in there one time, and it can be related to several different places. Could be in any row in the invoice, which is usually going to get autofilled. So those frequently will have absolute references. So there's a number of uses for them. You'll probably get tipped off that you really need to be using one if you get a div 0 error message. That's one of the telltale things that happens. And then the last one says use autofill. Okay, now there is no way that I can tell if you used autofill if you do it right. But there are lots of ways I can tell that you didn't use autofill. Okay, so there are quite a number of students that are clever enough mathematically to realize that if you want the total percentage of this total sales number down in J14, that's what needs to be in every column here. And so people will actually go in and type. This is my grandson playing on his Xbox. They will go in and type in J14, and they go down to the next number, and even if they did autofill it, they will change that to J14. And so it is pretty obvious, even if all of these say J14, if they don't say $J14, then I know you didn't use autofill to get it that way. And there are other ways as well, but things don't come out. Even though they give you the right answer, they're not in the right form to have been done with an autofill. So you need to learn how to use autofill if you want those points. And that pretty well takes care of the whole story. So I will, and that being the case, I will be here. The room will be open on Wednesday. If you are finished with your assignment and you have everything turned in by Wednesday, then you will get credit for being present, whether you're here or not. But that means that you need to have the Productivity Programs 1 folder with the Word folder and the Excel folder inside it, with the Word document and the Excel spreadsheet in their respective folders, and the whole thing zipped, and submit that zip file as your assignment. If that is there by Wednesday, then you don't need to show up in class. Okay, any questions about the assignment or about that particular process? Then I wish you a pleasant week, and class is dismissed.